All right, thank you very much. So that I was talking about a project. So here's my agenda. This is I usually have this kind of table content, not for the audience, but for myself, because I don't want to go over time for this. But this year, because of this conference, now we usually have several featured speakers from different parts of Asia, and this is a tradition of AsiaTEFL. But I think this year, yes, every year we have a very thematic session. So each speaker, like if you are focusing on assessment, each speaker talk about assessment. I think 2008 conference in Bali, Indonesia, when I was first invited as a featured speaker, and at that time, everyone was talking about teacher education there. And then AsiaTEFL actually put that in a book series, which I will talk about this. So AsiaTEFL has done a lot of things, I was collaborating things. But this year, we went a little bit further for that. So Professor Wang initiated a research project as a vice president of research. And we had this discussion of what we can do that. And one thing is, well, maybe we'll do this comparative curricular studies across the Asia. Maybe, so we have a representative from 9 countries or regions. And so we'll talk about this project. And this particular conference, this featured talk, my featured talk is quite unusual. I don't have any conclusion of this talk. So this is not, my talk will serve us, and my role is to give you a kind of roadmap of our large curriculum project we just started. And so I'm a kind of navigator for that. And I will introduce how, where each of the featured presentation for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow is related to which component of the project that each of the featured speaks. So I will really strongly encourage all of you to go to all the sessions to follow and mark your, I mean, I don't want to be biased, but then mark your calendar. And then I'll briefly talk about what we've done as a team and what we identify as the prevalent issues of curriculum or language policies in Asia. And I will just give you a map of the project so far. And my interim reflection as an individual researcher, somebody who are particularly interested in the language policy, socio-political aspect of the language. And I'll give my interim conclusion or maybe introduction to my colleagues' presentations, okay? So this is the members of project. Professor Tifan Wang, who is the leader, and Emilia from Indonesia. I think all of you are here. Phyllis Chu from Singapore, Saloni Priya from India, and Wei Kyung-to from Malaysia. So these are the featured speakers. And Juson Lee, originally from Korea, but is in Hong Kong. Kim Ja-an from Korea. Supom Tankesirin from Thailand. And Hon Chang in China. Tian Wei Zhang from China. And myself from Japan. So it's 9 regions, countries or regions are represented. And also, I didn't put that in the PowerPoint. Each of us are different, slightly different specialties. And some of the, like Tian Wei and I are more on language policy, language planning. And so we are viewing this, seeing this on that side. And also somebody who are very good at like technology, for example, Juson is one of them. And also different level of education, teacher education, testing, etc. So again, it was a very interesting, not just a multinational or multi-regional project, and then it's monthly this interaction, but also the multidisciplinary things, and also this kind of social atmosphere. We say, where's the national border anyway? And it was very natural, like nighttime conversation, something. like you saw the kind of flavor of that before this session. It's something like that. But again, I learned a lot, and I will talk about this. So now going back to like my involvement in this kind of issues, I first involved in actually became interested in the kind of comparative ELT curriculum study, much more from the language policy in education's point of view. When I was involved in and contribute a chapter in George Brain, who was in Hong Kong, who was originally from Sri Lanka, but who was in Hong Kong at the time, and 2005, teaching English to the world, history, curriculum, and practice. And it was a kind of serious book. And it was a kind of part of international TESOL's non-native English educators caucus. And now it's intersection. I was a chair at that section in 2004, and that was a 2005. So I was when I was a chair of that group. And the requirement was, now you are in charge of Japan, you talk about history and curriculum and the reflection, your reflection. And I thought it was easy. And it was a nice volume. And I think I still recommend my student to read it. But problem was, when each chapter author has a different interpretation of what curriculum means. So which means some talk about the national syllabi. Like I talk about national syllabi, I talk about history of national syllabi, and while others talk about teacher education curriculum and how to train teacher, what are the requirements, what are the licenses. And many talk about language policy, but at a different levels. Somebody talking about what later Professor Spotsky was talking about language management. And somebody's talking about more only or using English only or not, something like that. So again, each depending on your discipline, which is quite natural when you talk about the curriculum, but we are not talking about the same thing. And also AsiaTEFL, as I said, the history of AsiaTEFL, and we've done, AsiaTEFL is the largest organization. We've done this collaborative project, put together in the books, and mostly from the featured speakers line up based on the conference theme. And we've done this for the 206, so book series started from 206. And please, I encourage you to visit the AsiaTEFL website, and so that you have all the AsiaTEFL book section, and you have this kind of titles and table of contents. English education in Asia, history and policies, and it's more policy-oriented, and curriculum innovation and implementation in Asia in 207, and teacher education and assessment. So apparently, these are the area, the history, of course, the development there, the national policy guidelines, something which I'll be talking about, and teacher education is one area, and assessment. Now, these studies had been taken place in nearly 20 years, or almost 20 years ago. So if it's a publication in 2006 and the study had been done in the 2003 or something like that. So these are the history. So this is a good time to reflect on the more current issues and provide that together. So that's why that we have this project. In this project, since the spring, that we planned, our tentative target was this conference. And with the strong leadership of Professor Wen and it's a wonderful team, as I need to repeat this, we were doing very wonderful. And we met, we arranged a Zoom, and we met this, and we assigned like presenters, and we do discussion. And we usually schedule to stop within 1 hour, but never stop in 1 hour. And I think 2 hours and 2 hours, 2.5 hours, that. And then by the time I finished that, it's like if you are in Korea and Japan and you are almost midnight there. And then we talked about this and different edition. Then first homework for us was, is there any guidelines, whatever you call syllabus, curriculum, national policy paper, etc. Bring that, and we circulate this, and we'll look at and see what you notice. You cannot do the thorough searching over every single item. That's not the policy. But the focus was, and also what this is something I was interested in, the issue that you can see on the screen. Is there any guidelines in the region? Maybe you have a national guideline, you have a school guideline, you have a local guidelines. And what are they? Who issued the document? And who issued the document? Maybe ministry or something. I will give some answers there. But then who writes the document? So maybe it's not the issue. The writer may be the academics like us, somebody who appointed as a committee member, etc. Who are the primary leaders? Therefore, the administrators, teachers, learners themselves, which is very rare. Who actually, and how much control, or I would say, I use the word influence, carefully select the word, but control they have in some countries. How they, and how much do they influence on local educational policy if it is a national guideline? How do they influence on the teacher training? Obviously, this is one of the areas that the AsiaTEFL had been paying attention. And how do they influence on the classroom? This is actually, we are doing that for the classroom, but there are a lot of filters in between. And how do we manage these? I know, no, you cannot say, okay, go ahead and teach. You cannot do that. And as far as this is the public education, this is school education, you have to have a certain guideline. But if the guideline controls too strong, and that it goes negative. So now we see those presentations on language policy, something. We got a complaint from a teacher, we got a complaint from a student, and we have a lot of problems raised. But again, we never come to systematically provide a guideline, or their guide. This is a guideline, but our guideline to how to deal with the issue. So this is one of the purposes. Now, this is a briefly primary response to the following meeting. I think it was in June, our meeting. This is I just got a scratch from my note. So in these questions, so my colleagues and whose names are there actually responded. It's a kind of informal conversation, and the first question: is there any guidelines among these 9 countries and regions? Yes, mostly yes. The government ministry has a guideline for example, English language teachers guideline. In the case of Japan, the courses of studies, which is there issued by the Ministry of Education. And so mostly if it's a national level, that is the ministry and education, it was a very interesting. And then we branded, for example, in the case of Thailand, as Supong was talking about, there are 2 ministries, different ministries. One is the ministry in charge of the higher education, and one is the ministry in charge of secondary education, which is separate. And for the most of their colleagues' reaction, that is a new learning experience, because I think, ministry is just education and something. Then actually, this kind of bureaucratic division also changes shape of what is included in there. So actually, university does teacher training. Was a secondary, division will take care of language learning. This is one of the cases I was so impressed with what Tsupo talked about. And who writes the document? This is interesting. In many, some said, well, probably academics appointed, but we don't know because they don't reveal who writes it. So they say the ministry writes it. Well, maybe some of the public document in Japan is that they say the ministry or committee write it, but they don't reveal who's in the committee. The other cases, and then majority of the cases, mostly the academics, the university professors like that who are appointed. But actually, there's also the issue of discussion in the AsiaTEFL conferences and among our group, we're talking about who are writing document, maybe okay, if you are writing a guideline for the the junior high school, for example, but it is very often the case, the writers are college, university, higher education people, and there's no one who are actually teaching at the junior high school, etc., that kind of things. But this is also the variation. And who writes a document? So bureaucrats, committee appointed by a ministry, and so who are they in the committee? That is another story, including academics, teachers, and publishers, and well, maybe asking consultant to write it, and textbook write, etc. Then who are primary leaders of the guideline? In the many cases, actually, it is at least superficially aimed at teachers, classroom teachers. However, of course, it goes to the national, goes to the local. The local has interpretation, which I will talk about later. And then local, maybe the educational committee, board of education, or maybe then school superintendent, and then go to school, then school principal, or maybe administrator, ask teacher, and then so you have these things. So there are different levels. And also, this is the case of maybe China and Japan, maybe I think Korea, that textbook writers who, follow this guideline. And when textbook writer writes a textbook, and they have to explain, I think this is the most significant in China and Japan, explain that you are actually following it. So you have to legitimate the contents of a textbook against this guideline, something like that. And there's a different degree of that. So, and then those influential part, this is what we are interested in. But again, you cannot really, this is like a couple of months we can do that, but this is something we are paying attention. Now, direct influence or indirect influence. So it says superficially, I said, no, those policies are for the learners, like in the case of Japan, the course of studies, 学習指導要領. And no learners will read that. And even the college students do not read it. And unless you want to take a teacher training, I mean, teacher certificate examinations. But when it becomes a time that textbook writer has to defend it, or maybe when inspectors come to, then everything is evaluated based on this kind of guideline. Now, this thing is, I was talking about the things in Japan, but this is not necessarily the same. And also, how do they influence on teacher training? Of course, you have to train the teacher who can teach. If you are in the public school, who can teach that according to that guideline. So teachers, trainees, the pre-service teachers has to be become familiar with the guideline. And if the guideline is revised, you have all the that affect the in-service teacher training, etc. So that may be indirectly, but again, gives a kind of washback effect. And also the classroom, it's eventually, no curriculum. There are a lot of examples in some countries say you very specific items to be taught in grade 7, for example, like grammatical items. In the case of Japan, you cannot teach past perfect until the certain time of a grade 8 or something like that. So it's going to be difficult to write a textbook without past perfect. In a certain context. You have to teach that context. You cannot use a past perfect, something like that, or certain vocabulary. So that kind of things. So there's a wonderful discussion. One thing which I didn't put this, but something I was out of discussion at the time. Everyone's talking about the national exams for graduation. And then I think a couple of days ago, I was exchanging email with Saloni. about the Indian cases, the Japanese cases. The Japan, as far as I know, was the only country or region represented in these 9 areas in this group that we don't have a kind of standard exit exam for example, secondary school something. We have entrance examinations, but that is more on the how to integrate. But that actually serves as a qualification of high school graduate, something like that. So, but Japanese scholars, therefore, are not paying attention, including myself. Unless I had not entered this group, and I didn't. I've been telling my student, this is a universal. You have an entrance exam. You need to go to college, and everybody. So I know like O-level or A-level, the British system there, and I thought it was a very common in Europe, but even also this is a kind of common sense in Asia, which the Japan was an exception. So this was a really great recurrent learning experience. So let me just summarize what I ever say. So far in the discussion, we found national policy guidelines exist which affect directly or indirectly affect the local, and then local to the individual. Now, the problem is how local government, including school principals, interpret the policy. In a way, in the case of Japan, so you have this course of study document. They don't exactly tell how to interpret it and try to provide, okay, you have a freedom, something that, but you have to take a responsibility. That's the same case of textbook examples. Professor Wen once mentioned about a Chinese guideline and textbook writers has to follow and then explain it. And then the same cases happen in Japan. The strict textbook in the textbook, I would say, inspection system. Now, inspection also goes through the ideology, but it's more like it is not like whether this is good or bad, but whether it follows the guideline. Then I think when the textbook is not approved in Japan, is very often the case, the not understanding the guideline, but it's just they have a different interpretation of the same description of the textbook, the guideline itself. And also the same things happening. So you have the filter, screening filter something. So individual thinks, because teacher thinks what teacher can do best within the constraints. And teacher actually sometimes interpret its own constraints. Oh, maybe I cannot do that because the guideline says that. And I think schools, and I'm also an administrator. I mean, I'm in higher education, I'm administrator, but I'm involved in teacher training. I tend to, I'm saying radical things here, but as an administrator, I tend to take safer side and play it safe to get grant or to get approved or something like that. So that narrows down and then prevents kind of innovation of language teaching here. So let's go to now, I was talking about project, but I go to like, maybe I spend my this time very selfishly with what I've been doing, why I was interested in this. When Professor Wen actually proposed this project and then raised this proposal in the AsiaTEFL EC meeting, and then maybe we were asked to identify a researcher, up-and-coming researcher in the different regions, something like that. Of course, we have a great younger researchers here, but it was quite unusual that the vice president jumped on this topic because I was, hey, Professor Wei, I'm interested. I think I can do that. I'm very interested. I can introduce a younger one, but initially I want to jump on this. because of my research history, here's the things I mean, these are the unrelated things, but I've been doing more of the media discourse or critical analysis and language policy. And, but I've been very interested in this interpretation of this course of study, this national guideline. But I put this, just my publications, kind of, I remapped my publication in a couple of last 20 years. So I did how that English language teaching is talked about in mass media. Or the general public's complaints about English language teaching and using those SNS and things and that in 2017. Program management, this is about the higher education, but program management, entrance exam, this is I presented. And then also I presented this part with the ELF symposium with Susan Holtzman and Fuad, and that was in the AsiaTEFL, teacher education and policy in general and materials. And I realized, I thought they were unrelated, but these are a part of what we broadly interpret curriculum that we are talking about. So I will just go to, this is, I think among that member, Professor Chan Ting Wei and myself are more on the language policy. I would say, I would not say specialist, but interested in, Ting Wei is a specialist, but I'm a kind of somebody who are interested in looking at language policy. And then this is Elana Shohami's book on the language policy, and in the 206, and she has a chapter, and a very early part of chapter about language education policy or LEP, and we're talking about, and very, I mean, Shohami's discussion, which I like, it's very provocative, but something, yes, this is something I've been thinking about. And then I will just quote several parts of Shohami's, which is related to this project and my involvement in this project. In most countries with centralized education system, decisions regarding language education policy are made by central authorities. In the case of Japan, it's very typical, such as government agencies, parliament, Ministry of Education, regional, local education board, and schools. And that's corresponded to what I've been talking about, what we found. In these situations, LEP serves as a mechanism, language education policy in general as a whole, carrying out a national language policy agendas, including among the language policy, language education policy, and what to do with English in each of the context. The status of English versus foreign language. I don't know how many of you know that English is not and never been a required subject in Japan. And it is a foreign language which is a required subject. But in reality is the 97% of junior high school chooses English and English as the only foreign language offer. So I thought that English was a required language unless I became a graduate student to take language policy course. Oh, I thought that it was common sense. That everybody think it's a common sense that English is required, but no. Then Shohami continues, a slightly later paragraph there. LEP are imposed by political entities and top-down manner, usually with very limited resistance. Maybe I think this is, I don't want to go to the critical linguistic, the critical discourse analysis, but as I said, I didn't know, until a few years into my teaching career that English was not and never been a required subject in Japan, even though I was in the Department of English. So this actually, this Shohami's statement as a most generous, usually with very limited resistance because very limited resources provided, information provided, and schools and teachers comply. These policies are then reinforced by teachers, materials, curricula, and tests. Now, these yellow, I put the yellow, these are actually and coincidentally the areas identified by our project members, which would reflect to the theme of the featured talks coming up in this conference. Teachers, materials, curricular testing and assessments. So the project here, now this is the, again, going back to reorganizing the map of this project here. Maybe we are talking about the curriculum, but we started with this policy document to come up with the idea and come up with a lineup of this feature talk as well as symposium. So we carefully, so it has a kind of story there. So this opening is very important. This is something I kind of rearranged our discussion. This is the interim kind of report mapping of our project team. So we talked about policy and we have an objective and standard something. And first we thought that because everybody's talking different, it's going nowhere because I think we have a different understanding, different context, different interpretation here. But we all agree that we identify these following 4 areas are something of urgent concern that we need to that. And we need to figure out these, and actually we are not proposing anything new yet, but really as a taking advantage of this rich resources, this AsiaTEFL has accumulated and has in the organization with the different scholars working in different areas. I think we have to reflect on the current status of these areas in Asia, these specific 4 areas in Asia, so that it will provide a kind of baseline platform for the further study for the younger generation there. That are teacher developments, methodology, which Phyllis will talk about, assessments, and material developments. And also, for the last 2 years, we've all been suffering. But it's very amazing that I'm in my office right now. And it takes about maybe 7 hours and 8 hours to go to fly to New Delhi from Tokyo, and then actually and going to Narita is 3 hours, 3 more extra and something. So it is like usually, a long trip there. Of course, I would still love to go to India. So I just try to put my spirit as I were in India. So I went to my local Indian restaurants this afternoon to have a lunch, Indian lunch. And then just had 1 class to teach. And 5 minutes later, that I joined the AsiaTEFL, the opening ceremony. That's why I have a suit there. And then now here I am. But it's amazing that I can do it. I taught this morning. I attended a meeting. I had a lunch at the Indian restaurant. And then I'm presenting. But after this pandemic is over, I think what we've accumulated is knowledge, know-how, technology. This will continue. So there's another one. This pandemic and those IT and something. And this is another issue of identity interest, which we put that in the symposium.
Professor Oda?
Hi, yeah.
Yeah, 5 more minutes, please.
Yes, I'm finishing up.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm finishing up, okay? So these are actually I just put the time, this isn't a time schedule. So my presentations here, Emilia, the presentation will be, this is the Indian time at 2 o'clock tomorrow. This is on the learning objectives. Okay, so I was one of them. And then Phyllis Chu will follow at 11 o'clock on the December 4. And then this is for the English language methodology. This is on the Phyllis will be focusing on primary school, but this is on language method, how this policy guideline affects the language policy. And Saloni's was standardized assessment. So that's one component we identified. And we'll talk about in the last day, the learning standards. So assessment, self-awareness, learning standards. So it's a nice complement each other. So these are the 4 areas reflected to this my division there. And this is the symposium. Online ELT. This is a very exciting topic I was talking about. And then teacher development during the pandemic, and when she herself will moderate And it's a very limited time, but hopefully we can get what each of us will have Juson Lee, Kinja Supon, and this the Chinese guys Hong Zhang and Tian Wei Zhang. And so this is the symposium. So these that cover 5 components. Okay, now let me finish up with this slide and reflection for this is just the start. But I think it is time I will thank you very much for the Professor Wen and also the team, wonderful team. And we work together and I think we continue to work together. But it was one of the things that the AsiaTEFL need to do as a kind of a research network. Yes, we have a research network, but what we can will serve as a resource, kind of a hub of resource, both material and human resources to contribute to the English language teaching society, the Asian society curriculum. Of course, these are course of study students have to follow, but how we interpret differently. We have to deal with the diverse context in Asia, and of course, the washback effect of a curriculum and each of a level and specific context. Thank you very much.